Okay, good morning. Welcome back. You're probably noticing there's something different with today's video, and I appreciate that you noticed it. I reorganized the bookshelf. That's the difference today. Um, we're going to continue on our online lectures. Hopefully, you had a good weekend and you stayed safe, and you, your family, friends, and everyone around. Um, let's continue to be vigilant and look out for each other. Um, Today we are going to continue talking through the presentations. We're on student activity 17. That would mean that one of the booklets is close to being finished. That being said, when we do finish the booklet and we move on to the next one, I am still going to be marking these booklets, right? And so that would include um, the two booklets for this unit. The best way to do this, to give me the booklets, especially the two that we did in class, it would be to either take pictures of the pages um, and then send it to me. And if you do send it to me that way, try to put all the pictures in one email. Uh, just for the sake of not having my in my inbox be flooded with hundreds of emails, and it's pieces go here, pieces go there. It'll just be a mess. Um, or if you have a scanner at home, scan the pages. I know it's not the best system, but um, I didn't prepare for a pandemic, so didn't really think we'd be doing this. I thought we'd be doing it in class, but we have to go with the flow. That's what we'll be doing. Moving on, when we move on to the next unit, Unit 3, I'd like to see it on a Google Doc. So you'll do the questions and the fill in the blanks as a Google Doc, and then send that to me when we're finished. So you'll share it with me, and then I'll just go through it and I'll mark it. Same thing goes with your definition. So just do it all in one Google Doc so that I'm not getting a bunch of different emails. It's much easier, it's much simpler, so things don't get lost. So that's what we'll do going forward. At the end of the video today, hopefully I remember, I'm going to give you your project. It's the Africa Mapping Project. All the information is on our D2L. I'll go through it whenever we're finished this. And then, yeah, we'll just keep going with the flow. I know that means that we should be doing a test. Don't worry about that for now. And also don't worry about the written response. When I figure out what we're going to do with it, we'll go back and I will spend a day introducing how to do that. I won't lecture that day. I'll just give you that information, and then we'll be done with that, and you'll do that however we figure that out. But continue to do the quizzes though. So I mean, you should be close to doing one of the quizzes. You can do it today after this lecture or tomorrow. It's up to you. So we'll figure that out. Not figure it out. You'll do the quizzes. Just keep doing them. You have an infinite amount of time to do it, so I should just see 100% on them, and you've got a lot of time to do it too. So that being said, that is my introduction. Now we'll jump into today's lecture. Today's lecture is, again, Student Activity 17. So if you're following in your booklets, it is page 13. We are going to do a little bit of a case study, a focus on a specific country, and we're going to look at this question: how effectively have people responded to the legacies of historical globalization? So we spent last week talking about Canada and what this country has done and how it has dealt with the historical globalization and the legacies of it. We focused on the people of Quebec, and we also focused on the First Nations people. So we saw a very dark period in Canadian history. Unfortunately, a lot of the ways that a lot of the after effects of historical globalization, a lot of them tend to be negatives. A lot of the legacies are, and it all has to do with the effects of imperialism. So we've talked about imperialism. We've mentioned colonialism. Outside of Europe, every continent was at one point colonized by the Europeans. So the French, the British, the Spanish, the Italians, the Germans, they were all colonized. So they all dealt with imperialism, and we still see the effects of imperialism today. Africa is an excellent example of still feeling the effects of imperialism, because a lot of the poorest countries in the world come from Africa, and Africa is one of the densely rich resource densely rich with resources of all the continents, but a lot of it was stripped away because of imperialism. So the fact that a lot of other countries are so far ahead is because they were built upon the spoils of imperialism, the stuff that was taken from these other places. So most of the world's population is affected in one way or another by imperialism. Some of the lasting policies or structures of society were left from European imperialists or empires. A lot of the infrastructure, roads, railway lines, these were put in by the British. The borders that we spent a while talking about, those lines that Europeans drew in, that is a lasting effect of imperialism, because it brought people together that, shouldn't have been put in the same country together because of a history of difficult relationships, or relationships became difficult because of European favoritism towards one group over another. That favoritism is what we focus on when we look at our case study today on Rwanda. So we're going to focus a lot of our attention today on Rwanda. And if we were in class, we would spend the next few days watching a movie. I will tell you the movie we're going to watch. And then maybe if you have access to it online somewhere, I would encourage you to watch it. So we'll start with that, and then we'll move on. So we're going to focus on Rwanda, like I said. Rwanda, or the Republic of Rwanda, is located in Central Africa. It borders a few countries. So it borders Burundi, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Tanzania, and Uganda. So if you can Google it. It's also, if you're looking on the slides with me, this is slide 4. It is the darker shaded area on the map. So it is 26,338 square kilometers. So it is a fairly small country. To put that in perspective, Alberta is 661,848 square kilometers. So we are far bigger than Rwanda is. It's a very small country. Population is about 11 million people. This is an estimate from 2015. It's probably gone up a little in the 5 years since this information was put in. The literacy rate. So literacy rate just means how many people can read and write. It's sitting at around 70% of the total population. So we are seeing 30% who cannot read or write. The life expectancy is about 60. That is a low amount, but we're going to see that the country is it feels the effects of imperialism on things like infrastructure and other sort of things. To put that into perspective, the life expectancy in Canada is 80. So we're looking at about a 20-year life expectancy difference between Canada and Rwanda. So the GDP is 2,090 US dollars. The labor force occupation. So this is how work is divided in the country. So 90% of it is agricultural. 10% is industry and services. So that's why we see a low literacy rate, because 90% of people are farming. There's not really a need to say go to school for these sort of things. So there is a lacking when it comes to the industrialized portion, and that's why the GDP is also so low, and maybe even life expectancy, because services are also limited. So services do include things like hospital medicine and all that sort of stuff. So it is a poorer country. Before European imperialism, the area was known as Rwanda. The area known as Rwanda was inhabited by two ethnic groups. So these are two distinct people. The Hutu, so this is 85%, and they're the lower class, lower social class. These are the people that were farmers. They cultivated crops. They were the ones that were growing things. So kind of still going along the lines of the way that the labor force is divided, it was overwhelmingly agricultural work. And then you have the Tutsi, which was 15%, and this is the ruling class. They were also people. The way that wealth was, the way that wealth was, the way that you were seen to be wealthy was cattle. How many cows did you own? So we're going to see these two ethnic groups. One gets favored by the the European imperialists, and then that creates a conflict for when they leave, because it's kind of like if you had a parent, and this is how the Europeans would have saw themselves, and they favor one child. When the parent is gone, the child who is not favored is going to feel upset, and there could be some lasting effects or repercussions. So the area was taken over by Germany. It reinforced ethnic divisions and put the Tutsi in the ruling position. After World War One, Germany loses all of its colonies as one of its punishments. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. And the area goes to Belgium, which made sense for the Europeans because the Belgians had the Congo right next door. So after the First World War, the Belgians take over, and they continue this ethnic division. So the Tutsi are still seen as being in charge, and they even do something as requiring identity cards. So not only have they started to create this ethnic division, they're making it even more so when they give out identity cards. So these cards would have identified you as Hutu or Tutsi, so that you couldn't lie. And then there was certain social things were given out, privileges for one and difficulties for the other. So Belgium left in 1962. So after World War II ends in 1945, a lot of European countries start to leave their colonies. Some do it a lot more peacefully. Some leave because the colonies revolt and actually kick out the Europeans. So some of the best examples of that would be Vietnam and Algeria. They kick out the French. So civil war erupts, and the Hutu, the the ones that were in charge, form a government, because they were the ones that were in charge, even though they were the minority. And the Tutsi are forced to flee because now the favored people have taken over. So there's concerns. So economic conditions worsen in the 1980s. We see industry, agriculture, all these things start to collapse because there's unrest between the people. So Tutsi Rwandans, so the people organize the Patriotic Front, and they invade from Uganda. So they come from another country and they attempt to overthrow this Hutu government and sort of prop themselves up. The campaign begins against the Tutsi and sympathetic Hutu. So the government sees this as a challenge, and rather than just crumble, they decide to take matters into their own hands, and they're going to go to war. So we're going to see a civil war erupt. So it'll last up until the 1990s, so 1983. A peace treaty is signed, and political power required to be shared. So a peace is mediated between the two, and essentially what they're told is that you're going to have to get along, and you're going to have to share power. So this peace doesn't last too long. The Rwandan president, I'm trying to say his name, I'm looking, Juvenal Habyarimana, I probably butchered that, I apologize. His plane was shot down. So the Hutu blame the Tutsi for this, and because they are still in government, they decide to take matters into their own hands and exact revenge for the killing of the president. So they start to broadcast on the radio, encouraging militant action against the Tutsi. So we see a flare-up again of violence. So what I would do right now, if you're following along, we find ourselves on slide 10. And on slide 10, you see a timeline of events. In 1860, it's a Tutsi king. In 1924, Belgian colonization begins. In 1933, ethnic identity cards issued. 1959, Hutu defeat ruling king, the Tutsi king. 1962, we have an independence from Belgium. 1990, we have a civil war starting, and then 1994, we have a genocide beginning. This is a very simplified timeline of events that we've sort of been talking about briefly, but we will focus our attention primarily on the 1994 genocide. So at this point, you could answer question 23 in your booklet, but we'll just keep going on here. So if we were in class, we would have watched Hotel Rwanda. It's based on a true story. It is very good. It follows the life of Paul Rusesabagina. He's a hotel manager, and the actions that he does during the Rwandan genocide. I will put a link in the description, a interview with the actual Paul Rusesabagina. And if I can, maybe I'll even find a trailer and I'll put it in there too. Maybe not. But I would strongly encourage you, if you can find if you own a copy, or if you can find a copy of this, watch it. It is very good, and it'll shed a light on the tragedy that happened, and it's a movie, so it's sometimes better to watch than to just have someone explain it to you. So genocide begins, and for those of us that aren't aware, genocide is the mass killing of a population based on something specific. Usually it's ethnicity or race. It could be religion, these sort of things. We've seen many different genocides throughout the world. So this is one of them. So genocide erupts, and by July 19th, an estimated 800,000 to 1 million um, have been killed. Um, the reason that this is all genocide is evil, but this one has a very sinister side because the militants didn't just use guns or other sort of means of killing. It was very hands-on because they used machetes. And if you're not sure what a machete is, it's a really big knife. So it's very hands-on. It is very bloody. It is very traumatizing for all people involved. So we see Tutsi and moderate Hutus killed throughout this. So the Hutus have formed a government that is very much in favor of killing off the others and the moderates of their own people as well. I will also put a video in the description of a person who survived the Rwandan genocide, and she will tell you her story. So, the killing is going on. The Tutsi are trying to find a safe place to hide. So they're trying to shelter themselves from the Hutu militants, but it's hard to find because the country is so small, and because they broadcast it over the radio, people have just started up these mobs of violence that are running around. In other examples of genocides we've seen in the past, it's very much an organized thing. I'm thinking the Holocaust during the Second World War. The Germans were very much very organized, very meticulous on how they did things. They moved people from place to place to place, ultimately ending up in one of the concentration camps or death camps where the killing took place. In this case, it's more a free-for-all, springing up mobs here and there of militants that are just going out looking for victims. And because these identity cards had been put into place, it was really easy to identify these people. So churches, UN buildings, schools, these were all places where they tried to hide, even hotels. They tried their best to hide, but it was still too much. All these places were overrun, and that's why the death toll was so high. Nearly 2 million Hutus fled the country and occupied refugee camps all around countries around Rwanda. We kind of saw that not this year. We saw this recently during the Syrian civil war. Millions of Syrian refugees flooded out of Syria and made their way as far as Austria in Central Europe. And they just did whatever they could to get out. We still see that now. We still see refugee camps in places like Lebanon and in places like Turkey for Syrian refugees. So the Hutus did the same thing. They fled to other countries and they set up refugee camps. Refugee camps, if you're not familiar, are essentially just camps where people, there's temporary shelters that are built. The government or aid groups from other countries will send them food, water, clothing, and other sort of things just to keep them alive. So this is one of the things. The genocide really displaces a lot of people. A lot of people have moved out. For those who didn't move out, there was a lot of killing. So on slide 14, you can see the breakup of Rwanda as a country. So the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or the RPF, began moving through the countryside. Genocide ends in the regions they occupy. So remember, the Rwandan Patriotic Front is a organization. If we go back, is a Tutsi organization. They wherever they occupy, that's where the genocide stops. So this map here you can see the arrows. They correlate with a color, their advances throughout the months, and they capture Kigali, the capital, on July 19th, 1994. That is essentially the end of the Rwandan genocide. However, we're going to go and backtrack again. We're going to go through what's going on in Rwanda, but we're going to look at it from an international response. So there was an international response to the Rwandan genocide. The United Nations had sent peacekeeping missions to monitor the ceasefire, because if we remember, there was a civil war that erupted, and it ended in 1993 with the signing of the peace and a ceasefire. So Canada has a role to play in this, because it's led by a Canadian Lieutenant General, Romeo Dallaire. If I'm saying his name wrong, I apologize. Dallaire repeatedly warned of problems. So we have a person on the ground who sees the events of each day, and he noted the spike in the importance of machetes. He saw that they were coming into the country, and he started to sense something was brewing. So it was difficult for the United Nations to become involved. There was limited influence on the internal affairs of sovereign countries. So the United Nations, for those of us that don't know, is a global organization where all countries of the world are a member of. So they do try their best to make sure that wars don't happen. They focus on dialogue. They try to protect the rights of different people. So there's many different branches of the United Nations. But they do have a limited influence on internal affairs. So the United Nations doesn't have a whole lot of power to go into countries and kind of run the show. That's one of their limits, so they couldn't get involved in that way. So Dallaire is ordered not to interfere, included to not protect civilians. So he has been told, this is how it's going to be. You are not to get involved. But when the violence broke out, they began to document the genocide for later records. So they did start to try and organize things. And if you watch Hotel Rwanda, you will see the very limited involvement they had. But there was some, so we're not going to just discredit it. So I encourage you to watch the movie. So there was there wasn't a whole lot of international efforts to fix things. There wasn't a whole lot of international response when you'd think there should have been, because this whole conflict it all comes from the fact that international groups, European imperialism, kind of set up the stage for violence and for conflict. So we fast forward, the genocide is over, it's time to look for justice and reconciliation. So the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was created in 1994. So very quickly it was created, and it's going to attempt to punish high-ranking officials who were involved or who encouraged the genocide. So they're going to seek out those who were involved, those in positions of authority who kind of, spurred this event on, really pushed for the violence to begin. We see this international criminal court system. It started after the Second World War because of the events of the Holocaust and what the officials in Germany and in Japan had done, and in Italy too, to some extent. They set up courts to try these people for crimes against humanity and war crimes. So essentially, they are doing this again in Rwanda. They are attempting to punish those who were involved, but it's a pretty slow process. The rebuilding of Rwandan society, it needs this. This is necessary for things to move on. So 95 individuals were indicted. They were found guilty of acts during the Rwandan genocide. So the Gakaka courts established community courts for lower ranking officials. So we see the international courts kind of focusing their attention on the higher up and the more high officials. These smaller courts, which were established in these communities, they're for more of the lower ranking officials, and a lot of the people who were tried through these courts are the ones that had a lot of the actual physical blood on their hands, because these are the ones that were doing the executing, and they put over 850,000 people on trial, and the courts were closed in 2012. So they did a lot more processing than the other courts. We're looking at a 95 versus 850,000 plus people put on trial. So I mean, you can see which one was a lot more effective. So after the justice and reconciliation, there's an attempt to try to build the country again. So focus on the economy. So under the Belgians, coffee was the primary export. So they were growing coffee and shipping it out. That's why 90% of workers were working in agriculture. They're working on coffee plantations and farms. But during the Civil War and the genocide, that industry was destroyed. With any sort of civil war or genocide, infrastructure and buildings and everything in society is basically destroyed. If you look at Syria now as an excellent example, the country is, a lot of it is still in ruins because of the violence that is taken place. So they attempt to rebuild. They attempt to focus on building up a strong economy again. So by 2006, coffee was 30% of its exports. So it was a slow build. So there was the establishment of the Maraba cooperative, allowing Rwandans to get higher prices for their coffee. So there was an attempt to give more back to the Rwandan farmers, to get more into the economy, to try and build up the society that had been destroyed during the Civil War and the genocide. There is some international support. Women's support was key, because many were raped and had unfortunately gotten HIV and AIDS because of the genocide and Civil War. So there was a response. Women for Women's International is an example of an NGO, so a non-government organization that was supporting Rwanda. So we do see, again, some international support, but the problem is that it's not a whole lot, and it's unfair because this all started because of imperialism. This is a legacy of European involvement in a country, European favoritism of one group over another, European exploitation of resources, and then when the Europeans leave, they essentially say, we're done here. Good luck, and it was pleasure doing business with you. And they leave, and these problems spring up. And there's no attempt to say, okay, maybe this was our fault, let us come back and attempt to fix things. There was none. There was no such. There was small intervention by the United Nations and the non-government organizations, but again, we do see a lot